Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Glad on this episode, delighted to be talking with author, creator Alin Silverwood. Alin, thank you for jumping in, joining, and bringing the impressive Green Arrow collection.
Yeah, it's kind of watching over my shoulder, pointing things out to me.
That's right.
Thanks to have for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'll mention a couple of works. We'll also mention your history with comics, working with Marvel Comics. And so the works that I know you for in the world of prose are Lost Clans of Lydania and Tangled Woods being another one of those as
Oh
well.
yeah, I forget about the book of short stories, Tangled Worlds. It's
Hmm.
just a book of Twilight Zoney type of short stories. I'm also into the paranormal, supernatural kind of thing. I do some ghost hunting, amateur ghost hunting sometimes, and that stuff kind of appeals to me too, as well as things like superheroes and fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
It
I'm
all
lost.
of those things live in a really cool kind of intersecting, interesting world of like what if?
I'm clearly into escapism. I mean, I don't know if it's because the world is the way it is sometimes,
Right.
but I have always my whole life I've been more fascinated by the unreal than the real. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, the more out there, sometimes the better. I don't want to. I've never been very interested in the typical like cop shows and stuff like that on TV. It's like
Mm.
it's just the same thing over and over. It's like, okay, some guy's busted for drugs, blah, blah, blah. It's a bunch of shootouts. It's just guys walking down the street wearing regular clothes, shooting guns at each other, driving cars around. I'm like bored with that. I'm like, give me something that looks good, looks interesting, and looks different. Something that feels
Yeah.
different. Give me a world that's not quite what I expect when I walk out the door or watch the news. Give me something outside of that realm. Then I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. Or I might be.
Same.
That's how you get my attention. And
There's
so
more
that's
of a
obviously what
chance.
I do as a creator. It's like you create what you're interested in. I think people tend to create what they like. It's like I wouldn't fare very well trying to write that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I just don't have that interest in it.
Yeah.
Closest I come is some kind of like Agatha Christie type mystery type of things, because there
Hmm.
is kind of this element. Historical fiction is interesting to me because history is to our modern world, it's as unreal as fantasy.
Yeah.
It's something we can't reach, touch, or have, so it becomes like unreal,
Hmm.
even though it was. So I'm interested in historical stuff and things that are set in period, and then I'm interested. Give me a Downton Abbey or
Right. Yeah.
Death on the Nile or something like that. And I'm like, that's intriguing, different periods and how things were, you know. I'm a big history geek. Uh, people laugh at me for how many times I've watched Ken Burns' Civil War documentary.
If you like it, you like it.
I
And
mean,
it's
I'm
interesting
fascinated.
stories.
It's fascinating. It's incredibly fascinating stuff. Like,
Yeah, the best looks at history, I think, are based in the story and the story that's being told.
I do think that's true. I mean, it's a good story. Even stuff that I wouldn't normally be interested in, if it's really a story that grabs me, I can enjoy it. But
Mhm.
it's just not something that I'm normally going to jump into. And most of the things people are crazy about, I'm just like, I don't get it. John Wick is big, and this is probably sacrilegious, but I'm like, get it, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you get that one touching moment where it's like he's upset because somebody killed his dog, right? And it's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
and it's like, and so we just have this just string of shooting sprees, and I'm like going, that's the story. I lost it. I'm like, not interested. Out. Leave me out. But it's not my thing.
What initially connected you with storytelling and sort of these worlds of fantasy that you like to explore?
It's funny. I say I was into books from pretty much from the beginning. I don't even remember the time when I discovered reading. I've just always enjoyed it. I enjoyed fascinating stories, probably from the moment I was born. I guess. I mean, I was an early reader, and I just kind of wound up sort of seeking out these kinds of stories. Um, I was having my own ideas by the time I was 5, and I don't know where they came from. They were just in my head, and I wanted to get them out. Um, when I was 5 years old, I was kind of drew a stick figure comic book, and I didn't even know. I don't think I even knew what comic books were, but that's what I was doing. Um, and so it's been, it's just been a thing that I mean, I don't know where the stories come from. It's been a kind of a lifelong struggle for me to figure out. I get all these ideas, they just come to my head, or sometimes there's something spurs them. Something else that I'm interested in spurs me to think about something like, oh, what about this? What if it was this? Or, it's sometimes it's like it's a what if idea, but
Hmm. Hmm.
so I haven't actually been able to get as much of my ideas and stuff produced and out there because well, I'm neurodivergent. So I don't know if that has anything to do with my attraction to the written word, but I'm betting it has a lot to do with why I don't produce as much of my ideas as I should or want to. I mean, I beat myself up about that a little bit. You can do that as a we are our own worst critics, and I have enough to
True.
criticize myself about, believe me.
Well,
um, but I mean, it's just like we were just talking about a minute ago. It's the things that interest me are the more fascinating or unlikely stories, unlikely true stories even. But um, I'm I like things that I don't know. I mean, it's just it looks different and it feels different from what I can experience in my life. And that's more interesting to me than what I can just, it's like, it's not like, it's not like something that I would know. It's
hmm.
like I like the stuff that's like, oh, this is different. I wouldn't know about this, because this is from somebody else's imagination. I
Yeah.
mean, at a very young age, I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and that from there, I was into the fantasy. And then, of course, by the time I was, you know, a young kid, I Star Wars came out, and Star Wars that literally sealed my fate. I was like, this is
Hmm.
it. I am into this stuff. I joined the science fiction book club and started ordering books, and
Same. Uh-huh.
yeah, it's like, and I had tons of books. I literally had a room full of books. I would use my lunch money and buy books, and I had so many books, and I was never anywhere without a book on me. And I was reading, and then of course, with DC and Marvel stuff, I was reading that, and I fell in love with the superheroes and that genre. It's that, and then paranormal stuff. Give me a good ghost story, or kind of a non-realistic or a twisted mystery or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, the history stuff and that sort of thing. And that just takes me to some place that's different. I like that. I like that, and I like I don't know. Obviously, the characters are important and the story is important, but I think the worlds tend to be really important too. More,
Hmm.
maybe more important.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's just that different world feel I'm
Yeah.
very into.
What's it been like to work from comics? Because I know you worked for Marvel and then to kind of begin to work in prose and do other forms of storytelling.
Well, it's funny. I really had always, I mean, I started writing stories in elementary school. I would write stories, and then by the time I was in junior high school, I was trying to write a book,
Hmm. Hmm.
which actually kind of like some of those stories wound up in Lydania. Some of those ideas wound up in Lydania. That was sort of a book that I really started when I was in junior high school, in a way. But of course, just it matured over the years and changed. But I got I got I got really into it. And when when I was really into Marvel, I was going down to San Diego. This is when San Diego Comic Con was the biggest con, but you could still access the creators and the editors. They were still there, and you could go in and talk to them, and they
Hmm.
would talk to you. You could get to them. Hollywood wasn't there yet.
Right.
And I went in and I was talking to one of the editors and writers, Richard Starkings from the Marvel UK.
Mhm.
And we hit it off and we're talking, and he was like, "Oh, you're from LA. I'd love to come up to LA and see it." And I was like, "Well, why don't you come up?" So we did, and we hung out, and I showed him LA and stuff. And I was like really into Marvel right at that point in time, and he was like, "You should, you know, come try to get a job there," because I was
Mhm.
working for a magazine publishing company, just like kind of a trade magazine publishing company, and I was even on the editorial staff. So he was like, "Yeah, you should come, try to get a job there." So he moved from England to New York, and then when he got there, he took over the apartment that had belonged to editor Bobby Chase, who was the
Mhm.
editor on the Incredible Hulk and Ghost Rider and GI Joe and She Hulk. And so he called me up and he's like, "Her assistant editor's just quit. Why don't you put in for it?" So I did, and I went to New York. And I got to New York and I'm like, "God, I hope this comes through, because if it doesn't, I don't know what's going to happen to me." I'm in New
Mhm.
York. It's like, but it came through. I got the job and I went to work for Marvel. Boom, just like that. Went to New York, and then I was working on the Incredible Hulk and GI Joe and Ghost Rider and several other projects. And then I even wanted to write for them. And a couple of the other editors found out that I wanted to, so they let me write some short stories. And I got into that, and I was very young. I was in my early to mid 20s, and I had gotten married very young. And so I was in New York, and here I was working at Marvel, thinking, "Good God, this is it. This is the dream."
Mhm.
Um, and and then my personal life just kind of was crumbling at the same time.
Mhm.
So I really didn't stay there too long. I wound up having to come back to Los Angeles, and I had to leave Marvel behind. Um, and I've always thought, I've always wondered, what if I'd stayed longer? I had actually put through a couple of pitches for things, for ideas for uh, comic series that were very popular with the editors. But I couldn't get the recognition. Um, I was told I hadn't paid my dues. And so I
Mhm.
couldn't get the recognition to actually get the project approved. And I, at a young age, everything. So I was very frustrated with that. I wound up just kind of moving on. I was just like, well, I'll get back to it. And I did some freelance after I left for them a little bit. Did some stories, and then I got working at Paramount Pictures. So I
Mhm.
went into a
Mhm.
movie. So I went into movies. So I went to Hollywood before Marvel did. You know,
Mhm.
and I worked at Paramount Pictures for several years. And I worked on projects like Titanic and Braveheart and Forrest Gump and things like that. I was there during that period of time,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that was kind of fascinating. Of course, working for a movie studio and working on the lot and walking, across the lot. And they were filming Star Trek, so I would walk onto the Star Trek set and stood on the bridge of the Enterprise or something. And that was that. So I got caught up in that and did that for a while. And then Hollywood turned out to be kind of a dog eat dog world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I moved on out of that, and the next thing I knew, I wound up in toys, which was like, okay, now I'm writing for Hot Wheels.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
wound up writing for Hot Wheels for the last 20 years. It's like my brother-in-law always teased me. He's like, "You've never had to grow up." Comic books, movies, toys. I'm like, yeah, yeah. I guess if you can have it that way, that doesn't hurt, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I still do my own thing, and then I got into after a while, I was like, I really want to get back into these. I had these long standing ideas, and I was like, I just couldn't get them out. And I had a couple of different people come into my life and say things to me that finally made me get them out. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
finished my novel. And I was like, okay, now there's several novels in my head, and I need to finish them. And I haven't gotten them finished. So that's been on my mind heavily for the last couple of years. And in the comics, it was just like I realized that there was an indie comic community out there, and I started talking to a lot of guys and reaching out to them. And next thing I know, I'm hiring artists and I'm drawing, and I'm having all these ideas for these characters that I've had in my head for 25 years drawn and come to life. And then I wrote the story, and I got an artist to draw it. I put it out, and it was like, wow, okay, we're doing this.
Mhm.
And I've got a couple of about two or three issues out of one comic, and another comic that I'm about to get out. It's a steampunk, kind of
Nice. Nice.
steampunk magic and mutants. I'm calling it, and it's pretty exciting. And I had the first issue done for a while, but I'm doing the second issue so that I can release the first second issue together. when I do. Um, but they're pretty. I think it's a pretty exciting property. It's definitely, if I can get enough people to see it, I think I can get a lot of people interested. My problem is getting noticed. It's hard. I don't really know how to get noticed. I'm not that good at that side of things. It's like, how do I get people? How do I get in front of people? You know,
Hmm.
in the modern world of social media and everything, it's like, how do I get these people to see my stuff and know about my stuff? That's where I have some blind spots. But
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I'll just ask people. I'll ask the experts. I'll find out. I'll learn, you know. I'll get it right. You know, I got a couple of things out and they went, you know, it's like, so I managed to make something happen. So it's like, okay, I'm not totally lost, but I want to get less lost.
Yeah, well, and this will be on YouTube and various and sundry podcast platforms. So glad to be part of whatever steps of getting your work out there that I possibly can.
I
Um,
appreciate it. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
That's
For
nice.
well, by all means, for folks that aren't familiar with the world of Lydania, anything that you would share? First, am I pronouncing that correctly? But also,
Lydania. Yeah.
okay, great,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Anything you would share that's sort of like a brief map of the world so people are sort of familiar.
Well, Lydania, you know, I had this idea that was obviously when I was at, like I said, it was at junior in high school and junior high school and in junior high, like seventh, eighth grade, something like that. And I had this idea, obviously influenced by Lord of the Rings and Terry Brooks stuff and things like that. But it was something that I wanted to do, that I wanted it to be not the same story. I wanted it to be a little bit different. And I've always loved Robin Hood. I mean, I really
Mhm.
love Robin Hood. That's hence my fascination with Green Arrow.
I was gonna
Um,
say big
yeah,
connections there.
it's been one of my favorite stories. And I was like, what if Robin Hood was in a fantasy world? And that's kind of what we've got. You've got a guy who lives in a world where the king is sort of out of control, and we get into the reasons why.
Hmm.
And the kid, um, you know, I was trying to escape some of the tropes, and it's like, well, everybody's an orphan. You know, it's like
Right, right.
Frodo Baggins, orphan. Luke Skywalker, orphan. Um, Harry Potter, orphan. It's like
Mhm.
everybody's an orphan. I was like, I wanted to try to escape that trope, and I couldn't escape it. It was like, no, he's an orphan, but there's a very good reason why he's an orphan,
Yeah.
and it comes back to some interesting facts that expose a lot of. There's this like whole hidden thing about the world that he lives in, and it kind of blows up in his face, and essentially it just becomes a chase book. It's like it's a lot of people have said it's really fast paced. It never lets up, and it's like, well, because it's a chase book. It's like literally this guy who knew nothing about who he really was suddenly is on the run without really knowing, and as he's on the run, he's finding out more and more
Hmm.
about it, and there are forces chasing him that basically it's a chase through the fantasy world, and it gets you exposed to the different things that exist in that world. um, I put in some pretty fascinating characters and some pretty fascinating aspects of the world. There are secret societies, and there are rock gnomes, and
Hmm.
you know, different things like that. Swamp dragon, um, but and he ultimately gets to this lost land where he would have been from had he known. And I don't want to spoil the ending or give it
Yeah,
away or
yeah,
anything, but that's where he
absolutely.
winds. That's where he winds up having to escape to. It's this is lost and for you know, forsaken land. And at the end of the first book, you know, that's where we leave him. And now he's got a grudge. So
Hmm.
we go into the next book, and that's where we start. The next book is called The Lost Weaponsmiths of Lydania.
Hmm.
Um, things that the things that the tyrannical king, who's just basically a paranoid individual, not necessarily without cause. Um, all of the things that he's basically afraid of are, of course, as you would expect from a king, are outlawed and banned. And of course, those are all the things that he comes to represent, that Rhinan Azure comes to represent, or connect to or need all of
Hmm.
the things that are outlawed and illegal. Um, so he's an outlaw, you know, but on a but probably on a bigger scale than Robin Hood. He doesn't just have a band of merry men in one little forest by the time he's done.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and excellent world building there, and lots of interesting themes. That's part of what I love about science fiction and fantasy, are the themes you can explore. Uh, Curious about the stories, the characters that you haven't had the chance to work with that you would enjoy tackling before we talk about where people can sort of find out what's next and follow along with your work.
Mm. Well, I have a very deep list of notes. I keep notes and things everywhere of things that I have, of my original ideas and characters and worlds,
Mm.
and they're they're fascinating. I'm like, I think people will love this if I can just get it out of me. That's my biggest challenge. So there's that, and all of that I'm going to try to get out. There's all kinds of stuff there, and several things are in progress and moving. I got my superhero comic, my steampunk comic. Uh, I've got the next book of Lydania. I've got a cozy space mystery that I'm co-writing with someone. Actually happens to be co-writing it with my girlfriend because
Oh, nice.
she's a writer, she's an author of many books, in the mystery and paranormal mystery genre.
Hmm.
So we're co-writing a kind of like Star Trek meets Agatha Christie type of a story.
Love
Um,
it.
but and then there's comics, and we were talking about, like, what would you like to get your hands on? It's like, oh boy, that's a long list. I mean, I always wanted. I was a big fan of the Avengers. I had an Avengers lunchbox in school, and that was back when they had, in the days of, Hawkeye and Yellow Jacket and the Vision and Black Panther, and it was like, I love those guys. It's like I would love to do an Avengers book and put my team of Avengers in there. And I always think about who I would have had in there. And it was like most of the years that there was an Avengers, all those years. I mean, you go back to the first Avengers, which is in the '60s, and you
Hmm.
read it all the way up into the '90s, and all those years, in 30 years, they never thought to add Doctor Strange to the Avengers. How do you not add I mean, the Sorcerer Supreme? Wouldn't he be an Avenger? Wouldn't that be like one of your guys? I mean, I would have him for the magic. I would have, someone like a Tony Stark for the tech.
Hmm.
You need Captain America for the leadership. I think about the team building. It's like, which aspects do you want? You want a big powerhouse, but the Hulk is unpredictable. And they had Doc Samson for a while, which is almost as strong as the Hulk, and he's a psychiatrist. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great if, the Doc Samson that we had when I worked on the Hulk, who shrank the Hulk and made him basically Banner, and Hulk became one. That was that Peter David story where we got, the combined Hulk, which was really cool because he was Smart Hulk.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
was like, well, what if you had the guy that made that, Doc Samson, in the Avengers? Because he could kind of be, I mean, I thought it would be like a lot of interesting backstories with him trying to shrink all of the other Avengers. It's like all of their stuff, and they'd be bringing it to him, and he'd be the guy that's like, he's out there kicking ass with them, but they're like coming to him, and he's like helping them with their personal problems, because they always had personal problems, especially Hank Pym.
Right.
God knows that guy had some problems, and I'm like, I can
Definitely.
relate. Having being someone who has problems, I'm like, I could relate to that guy a lot, and it was all caused by, the Pym particles. So, the Avengers is one that I've always thought I'd love to write. I wanted to, and of course they had a West Coast Avengers, and I wanted to write that so bad.
Mm-hmm. Love the West
Especially since,
Coast.
yeah, especially since I was a Hawkeye fan. I loved the old Hawkeye, and I had one of the things that I had pitched was an idea for a Hawkeye, ongoing series, and what I was basically trying to do with him was just to add a little bit more to his character by basically turning him into kind of a ninja type of a guy, you
Hmm.
know. Um, And then, of course, you know what happens a few years later is they come along and they turn him into Ronin. And I'm like, so he's
Yep.
this guy with swords. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Ninjas use bow and arrows. He can still use bow and arrows and be ninja. It's like,
Hmm.
no, no, no. It's like let's keep the archery part of him, but let's add the ninja as well. You know, it's like basically he's more stealthy and he's leaping through things and stuff. And I'm like, let's do that with Hawkeye. And that was what I had actually pitched. And I had this kind of like world traveling Hawkeye guy, and they loved it, but it was like they didn't think they could sell Hawkeye. And
Right,
I'm like,
right.
oh, you could if you did this,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
that was again I hadn't paid my dues. I didn't have any clout, Um, and so the Avengers. Okay, so other things that I would love to get my hands on. I was always a fan of the Legion of Superheroes. There was
Hmm.
always
Hmm.
so much potential to that book, and I always thought it was like people wound up kind of gradually over the years. It became so outdated and outmoded. It's like, this kid and that boy and this lass and that girl. And it's like, you need to switch that up because that doesn't work in a modern, but the characters were interesting and they're
Yeah.
and the whole concept behind the Legion of Superheroes. And I'm like, they were influenced and originated because of Superman. That's what they always gave as like why they formed, it's like they were influenced by the historic Superman. That was the Superboy tie-in when they started out, and it was like, well, it's like so ultimately they kind of came to be like they were influenced by what just Superman or perhaps the Justice League, and I'm like, why not call them the Justice Legion? I said the Justice League of the Future, and
Hmm.
I'm like, basically do that, and then let's pick out the certain characters and kind of like get this core group. And they've got such a big cast, which is one thing that's fun about it. But at the same time, there's a core group, and I was like, I don't know if they have the best core group. I'm like, I'm not sure that the guys that they had that they started out with as the best core group would be the best core group. So I'm like, play with that a little bit. And I was like,
Hmm.
let's have something, kind of happen. And then I was like, we can do some things there with how they exist and why they exist and what keeps them existing. And I was like, that could be so much fun to work with. Um, would love to get my hands on that and do something because I think it just has never really been. It's sort of started to die, and then they've had a hard time getting it off the ground. And I'm like, I think it could still be a viable product.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's just a matter of your approach, and I would love to approach it. Um, I mean, Superman. You take Superman. Now, there's a guy that has some potential. He's globally known, and
Hmm.
he's a cultural icon world renowned. And yet they can't sell Superman books. It's like they keep trying to bring out, oh, it's the new Superman, it's the new Superman, and it's like when you read it, it's like, no, it isn't. This is the same Superman it's always been. And it's
Hmm.
like this is why it won't sell because people are kind of bored with this guy. It's like at some point a guy who's so overpowered that it's not believable that anything's really a threat to him. It becomes boring. It's like I've got some definite things that are just shifts in my mind. They're just shifts of his actual, it's faithful to his origin, but they're shifts. And I think it would make him a lot more appealing to modern audiences without having to completely redo him. It just
Hmm.
actually, it's just some twists on his stuff that would be like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Some of these things that don't make sense to us anymore, it's like, well, let's do something with it that makes them make sense. It's
Yeah.
like kind of approaching it from the backside, a little bit of a back into Superman, and then come forward, and it's like, oh, now he works.
Go ahead. You were saying the Fantastic Four. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that's another one I'd love to get my hands on. It's like I remember, I think it's one of the earliest comics that I liked, that I remember liking, was some Fantastic Four stuff, and I
Hmm.
always thought that Sue Richards is actually one of the most powerful people in the Marvel universe. And they don't ever play her that way. And I'm like, there's really, there's really so much potential behind that character that has not been seen. It's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
imagine, I remembered when they had a kid. I don't know where it is now. I don't know if they've got the kid or not, but they
Hmm.
had Franklin Richards. And I'm like, imagine if you're a mom and Dr. Doom is threatening your kid. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm a father, and believe me, if you want to see me go ape shit, threaten my kid, So I'm
Right.
just thinking, okay, so Sue Richards has this power to control these force fields, and she can do things with them. And I'm like, I want the Sue Richards that goes off the rail. I want that Sue. I want to see that Sue Richards. I want to see the Sue Richards that shoves a force field bubble in Doctor Doom's mouth and starts to expand it and says, "You let my kid go, or I'll blow your head off." I
Right.
want
Right.
that Sue Richards. I want that Sue Richards. And I want that Sue Richards leading the Fantastic Four because I want Reed Richards. He just stretches. I'm like, he's got a brilliant mind, but I don't want him in the field. I want him like hurt so that he's in a wheelchair and he's having to kind of like run things with his brain from home while Sue is the field marshal and she's got
Hmm.
Human Torch and she's got Thing, and then you add a fourth character, somebody from the Marvel universe that would fit in really well, you know. And I want that Fantastic Four. I want a fantastic because they've replaced different people at different times. Ben Grimm was gone for a long time. They had She-Hulk in there for a long time, and I'm
Hmm.
like, who could you replace Reed Richards with if he's running things, from home base, but who's out in the field with Sue and Human Torch and Thing, and I'm like, that's the Fantastic Four I want to see. I'm like, I'm way more interested in that Fantastic Four. I want a more, hard edged Fantastic Four. I don't want the quite so much the comfy, cozy Fantastic Four. It's fun. I mean, that's what I liked as a kid. But I'm like, I kind of think that I'd like to see them kind of have to get hard, you know.
Hmm.
I'd like to see them have to get, like it's like you've had storylines of the X-Men are always in trouble. They're always kind of the dark horses. They're always on the outs. They're always on the run. People hate mutants, blah, blah, blah. The Avengers have had their problems. It was like the government oversight and everything like that. Nobody ever messes with the Fantastic Four. It's like they're always okay. It's like, well, what happens if they become the ones that
Yeah.
suddenly like people are like, it's like, and maybe it's this whole dark Sue Richards kind of a thing. It's like not dark, but just Sue Richards just goes bad, not bad, but she goes a little bit she gets a little bit rough, and people get afraid of her because it turns out they're like, oh my gosh, nobody realized how much power this woman has. And it's like, so
Right.
now they're a little afraid of this new Fantastic Four, so like maybe that fourth character kind of plays into that a little bit. And that I think would be a really fun story. I'd love to read that story, you know.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
would
that's what I
be.
like. That's what I want to write is things that I'd like to see. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like give me something that I would like to see, and that's what I want to write.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's you get the comics and stuff that I'd like to get my hands on. There's a few things, but I'm always thinking of things that I would do that I would have done. But I still have the ideas that I pitched when I was at Marvel for this for another comic that would still work today. It would still work today, and I think it would be as popular now as it would have been then. I think it would really work. Especially for today's audience. And then I have another one, which is kind of like for Marvel, which has some of their paranormal characters kind of teamed up in kind of a I don't know, like they're kind of like a paranormal Avengers, but not in the
Cool.
Darkhold way. It's a
Uh-huh.
little bit different. It's basically Mark Grunwald, who was one of my most influential people. I really liked Mark Grunwald, the stuff he did. He did, the Squadron Supreme and he did some really good and meaningful stories with Captain America. But he
Hmm.
also did he had created this group called the what are they called? It had the Shroud was like leader of this group, and they were really interesting. It's kind of this kind of weird, bizarre underground, like almost paranormal related characters. And I'm like, what if you kind of like rework them a little bit and brought them out as a team that actually handles like paranormal or interdimensional threats?
Hmm.
It's like,
Hmm.
the Avengers are kind of taking care of the world from like guys in the world. And I'm like, what if you had someone that was like handling this stuff that's like coming through? Like maybe it starts with, like maybe Man Thing is one of them,
Hmm.
uh, and it's stuff that comes through that swamp because that swamp is like a nexus, right, of worlds. And I'm like, so what if they kind of like hook up and they're like there? And I was like, well, ooh, who would make good characters? And I was like, ooh, I had this really good assemblage of team that would make fascinating characters, and they would all work really well together, and they each had a specialty that would work. And it's like the Night Shift. They were called the
Oh,
Night Ship.
yeah.
It's like I had this idea for the Night Ship that I was like, oh, I'd love to do that as a book with these specific characters. And it's like, yeah, there's definitely some good characters that you could put together. I wanted to. Gargoyle had disappeared for years, and I remembered him from the Defenders, and I was like, Gargoyle will be perfect. So I got that goth feel, that kind of gothic, London foggy ground kind of dark feel. But
Hmm.
they're dealing with different kinds of weird things, and yet they're weird themselves. So it's like, yeah, that would be fun. I'd love to see that. I'd love to do something with something like that, but I don't work there anymore. I don't know. I don't know if I can get back to the point where like I get that kind of notice to even be able to get somebody to listen to me pitch these stories to somebody. You know, it's hard to say. I mean, I still know a lot of the same people, but they don't all work there anymore either. So it's like I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, well, and you were talking about kind of different takes on DC characters. They have this built-in Elseworlds world of worlds. So it'd be interesting, if nothing else, there to kind of try out some different approaches and
Mm.
some different things.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't thought about trying to pitch to them, but maybe I should
Yeah, yeah.
pitch some of these ideas. A couple of things anyway. I didn't. I haven't. I've had a hard time in the last few years. Um, for several years, I've had a hard time with Marvel and DC books. Marvel, it's like it's really hard when you worked there and you were steeped in their lore and how important their continuity was. They drilled that into us on the staff, and it was like, and then they went through the kind of the bankruptcy thing, and then they were sold, and then they were sold again, and it's like so that whole you know our our corporate branding and in our heritage is this important thing just went out the window, and they just
Hmm.
went all over the place, and it's just like there are certain things that I'm like, I think you guys should have hung on to your brand. It's like a little bit. It's like you can twist things a little bit and still stay on brand. There's always wiggle room. But at the same time, there's things. It's like, yeah, bring in new things too, of course, absolutely. But I was like, there's certain things I think you built up over a period of 50 years. You don't just throw it out the window, and they kind of
Right.
just threw it out the window. You know. So I've had a hard time with Marvel. Just being interested in anything. I've tried to pick up stuff, and it's like I just don't find it to be as engaging as it used to be most of the time. And the DC stuff I've tried, they keep rebooting their universe every 2 years.
Hmm.
And I've
Hmm.
read, I don't know, two out of the three times they rebooted it in the last 10 years or so. And I would get into it and I'm like, well, this book is good. This one I'm not so interested in. This one I like. This one. And then I finally just, the last time they did it, I was like, I'm not trying it again. I'm just
Right.
not.
Right.
I gave up. So I don't even know they're doing this Elseworlds thing. I kind of got burned out on just going, I got to read another origin story for Batman again.
Right. Right.
No, thanks. I'm done. I'm good. It's like if you change them, it's somebody and it's a little bit different, a little bit off brand, that'd be cool. But they really wind up they don't, and it's like you do need to pivot a little. I'm not saying break the brand and completely reinvent it, but
Hmm.
pivot a little bit. Don't just stick with the same thing that we already all know. You know, sometimes there's a place for that. It's a fine line and it's hard. And I mean, I'm sure that everybody's trying. Everybody's got their own ideas about how to do this stuff. I've got my ideas too, but you know, I don't know. I don't know what's ever going to happen. They don't seem to be having a problem. I mean, I don't know how they're doing. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, neither of these companies is going anywhere anytime. They're still existing on the stuff that they're doing
Yeah.
as major companies. So whatever it is, it's like they're not going to go anywhere. They're too well established, and that's good. I'm glad of that. Even if I'm not really able to enjoy as much of their stuff as I used to, I'm glad that they're not going anywhere. Because you never know, it'll come around again, or maybe I'll get more interested in something again someday. I applaud them for at least staying around and trying things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like that. But who knows? You know, part of my dream has always been to like get to a point where like I can actually get to the point where like maybe I can get them to listen to me and throw some pitches at some of them, you know. But me and about a million other guys are dreaming about that. And I'm like, but I worked for Marvel. Don't I have a foot in the door? It's like, well, you know, you worked for Marvel a long time ago. A lot has changed since then. So it's like, yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
it's just it's having a brain that is always distracted, and you know you don't recognize the passage of time. It's like in my mind, it was like, oh, you know, we're from Marvel a few years ago. It's like, no, it's been a lot more than a few. And
mhm,
it's like I just, you know, I lose track of time and things pass by, and it's like, oh gosh, you don't realize how long it's been since you contacted so and so, or since you did this thing or that thing. And it's like that's when you have severe ADHD. It's kind of like that. And
mhm,
that's been one of my problems. It's like I don't realize how much time passes. It's like it's like that. It's gone. And you're like going, oh man, I meant to do so much more by now. But
mhm.
I think a lot of us have that feeling.
Sure.
But when I was actually in the middle of doing some of it, it's like you got to get back to what you were in the middle of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it
Well,
helps now that I'm trying to recover from these surgeries. I had these two major surgeries, and I was telling you, and they really sidetracked me in the last couple of years. I had them in 2022, and it knocked me off so far that in the last year I pretty much stopped everything, and I've just started the engines back up this year. So
yeah.
things are rolling and happening again now. So,
And may they continue to roll in the direction of all sorts of creative avenues.
let's hope. I mean, I feel it. You know, I feel it happening. As I'm definitely moving on things again. It's like okay, like I'm back in the groove a little bit now. So it's like that's good.
Yeah.
I had one project that got kind of hung up. We did a Kickstarter on it, and I got hung up because I was working with an artist, a young artist that basically I kind of found him in Dublin, Ireland. I found this guy, a good artist, and I was working with him on this, and then he had to quit the project, and it kind of left me going, oh, I've never had an artist quit a project halfway through. Well, yes, I had, and then those books got kind of like put on long term hold. This book, however, had already been kickstarted successfully, and I'm like going,
Mm,
and so I'm like, okay, I had to send out a lot of apologies. This book is going to be late, but we're still going to do it. It's going to be late, and it's like I had to kind of like I had to get better before I could get that moving again, and I've got it moving again. So I'm like, that'll be good. I'll feel good about delivering that. All of my other Kickstarters, it's like I had finished them before I even did the Kickstarter. Um, and I've got, you know, a couple more that are like done. So when I Kickstarted them, this will be done, you know. But this one, it wasn't done. And it's like, now it's going to be really late. And I'm like going, oh, I see how this happens now. This explains some of the Kickstarters that I've backed that I'm like still waiting for. I'm like, I get it now. It
yeah.
happens. There are delays. Things happen. But the best thing you can do is just, you know, get to them and get them taken care of. So
Yeah.
I'm doing that.
Well, by means of a final question, any spots online where people can follow along and
Uh,
kind of see what you're creating?
I, um, I, I mean, you know, I've got the books on a couple of books on Amazon. I've got some comics at indieplanet.com. Um, the the rest of my stuff, I have websites, but I haven't been very good at updating them, so they're a little bit behind. I'm actually in the process now of trying to get someone to help me kind of like update them and keep them something I can manage rather than having to pay someone to manage it. So I'm working on that, and that will be a good place. In the
Mm.
meantime, I mean, I'm putting stuff up on Facebook and Instagram, kind of just doing things. You'll find Pop Skull Press on Instagram.
So you were talking about
Yeah,
the spaces online.
the best place. I mean, I'm like right now. I'm using Facebook. I've got there's a Pop Skull Press Facebook page, and I try to put some images, and basically I'm just working on image albums there.
Hmm.
And I do post stuff on my own personal page, and and I'm using Instagram again. Like what I was saying is that yeah, I kind of got thrown when Facebook bought it and they changed a bunch of stuff, and I couldn't like make stuff go from my phone without it being cut off. And it was
Mm,
like it all used to resize automatically, and now it's like I think they put back in a tool now that you can resize it because I found that I'm able to use it again. And I'm
yeah.
going great. And I can use it on my computer, which I couldn't before. So I'm like, even though I have a problem being on the computer, it's like I developed a case of computer specific cyberphobia
Oh,
last year, and I can only spend like a certain amount of time on a computer at this point in time. My phone is fine. I can be on my phone for a while, no problems. But the computer, it's like I start to kind of get anxious and antsy with a computer, and it's like I worked on a computer every day for hours for years up
hmm.
until all of a sudden, boom, one day I was trying to throw the computer out a window and I'm like, I can't do computers anymore. I wouldn't even go in the room where my computers were for a while.
Oh,
So
wow.
it took me several months of building back up with exposure to come back and be able to get on the computer again. And I'm now up to the point where I could spend a little time on the computer with you. And so I kind of like I'm using it a little bit, try to do a few things with it here and there, and get a little bit more back into it without it being a traumatic experience for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, oh, good, another thing, another thing to work around.
These are
Of
the
course, that
things.
impairs your writing. Trying to write, it's like you can't really write as much on notes on your phone as you can on the computer.
Right.
So sparingly, I'm working forward. But yeah, Facebook, Pop Skull Press page, Instagram, Pop Skull Press. I wouldn't go to the Pop Skull website. I mean, you could, but there's not really anything updated there right now. I'm still working on that. That's going to be a work in progress. It sits there, but it's really kind of static
Mhm.
and has been for a while. But I also do editing. I edit books for other authors and stuff periodically. So
Very
um,
nice. Very nice. A
we do
life
a
of
little
the
bit.
written word.
I mean, it's yeah. This. I was like I said, I was kind of started it this career at 5 years old, really, and it really never left me. I was the kid in school when they had creative writing. The teachers would always pick a few stories to read, and I was
Mhm.
always among the stories they picked to read. I'm like going, and they would tell me, you're a really good writer. They like your story. We like your stuff you write. I would turn
That's
them in
cool.
late, but they liked them. So I'm like, well, I guess I got something going with this writing thing. I'll try to see what I can do with it in my life. And
Yeah.
eventually, I did.
Very cool. I love the callback, the symmetry of that part of the conversation, calling back to the original origins question. And glad to talk with you. Glad to have you back as projects are coming along, and looking forward to the creating that is on the way.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. I'll
Absolutely,
try to do you
absolutely.
proud.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure you will, by all means.